love to be able to do for this video is to go over rounding decimals. If you know anything about me, you know I'm always trying to come up with clever, weird, fun ways to remember math or to apply it in some way, right? But the one thing that I've noticed with rounding is that every year kids tend to have little jingles and they still have a tricky time remembering the jingle itself and then how to apply it. So my goal for this year with rounding, especially with rounding decimals, is just making sure that we apply it in really simple mathematical terms, use some logic, some counting with number lines, and so that way jingles really aren't necessary. If they work for you, that is awesome, but this is just another way to do it, okay? So we're going to start off here with this is an example of the jingle, right? So 5 or more, raise the score. I've heard 5 or more, let it soar. 4 or less, let it rest, leave the mess, blah, 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 right? So, but even still, if kids can remember this jingle, then when they look at an actual problem and they're asked to round, they're like, what? So let's go ahead and try to look at this in a way where we can apply our sense of counting and number lines to help us, okay? So the first thing is whenever somebody is asking you to round, you're looking for, like this says round to the nearest tenth, okay? So whatever you're rounding to, that's the place value that you're gonna underline. That is the last place value that you're gonna keep as well. So for 5 and 600ths, this first one here, right? If you're underlining the 10th column, the 10th spot, that is our 0, right? And then you chop off from there, okay? Whatever the place value is that you're rounding to, you underline it, identify it, and then that's the last place you're gonna keep, so you chop off the rest, okay? The reason why I wanna stop and think about this is we're gonna apply this as a number line, okay? So pretend you're at 5, correct? And we're just looking at the nearest little numbers to our place value rounding scenario, okay? So we're gonna say we're at 0, right? And we're trying to figure out what we need to do next. So envision a number line here with 0 on one side, right? And 10 on the next, okay? So if I'm at 0 and I do 6 hops, whee, am I closer to getting to the 10? Or am I still closer to the 0? Okay? If you need to work that out on your paper or on your board right now, to wrap your brain around it, go for it, you guys. Put a 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Locate where the 6 is at. Are you closer to the 10? Or are you closer to 0? Right? It should be pretty obvious you are closer to the 10, right? You're closer to rounding up than you are going backwards and rounding down. And that should tell you what to do with this number right here, okay? So if we're closer to rounding to the 10, right, that's what we're gonna do with our number as well. So I'm going to instead take a look at that 6, know that that gets me closer to the next number up, and that's how I'm gonna write it, okay? This is written as 5 and 1/10, right? But if I wanted to put a 0 right here, right, that would be the same concept, right? Instead of keeping it at 0, I would round up to a 10, and that'd be worth the same value, okay? So moving on, if we have 34 hundredths, right, and I'm asked to round to the nearest 10th, step 1, 10th. Locate that place value, underline it, because that's the last thing you're going to keep, and then draw that line to chop off the rest of it, okay? So I'm going to keep the 3, that's my 10th spot, and I'm going to chop off the rest, okay? Now I'm going to stop and visualize, okay? So pretend, if we're at 34 right now, okay? Pretend like what numbers could go on my number line that I'm trying to think of, okay? So if it's 34, that means picture your number line at 30, and then you're trying to picture all the way to 40, okay? We've done 4 hops so far. I was at the 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, all right? Is that closer to staying at 30, or is it closer to getting all the way to 40? Okay, so if I'm at 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. If you're doing all those hops on your number line on paper, which one are you closer to? Staying at the 30 or going up to 40? Well, you should see that you're closer to that 30 still, right? So as you are looking at the 4, you're saying, 4 little hops is not going to make me want to round up. So instead, I'm going to chop that off and it just stays as a 0. And that means that I'm actually closer to the number 30, okay? I can write it as 0.3 or 0.30, right? 3/10 or 30 hundredths is the same thing, okay? Now I'm looking next door again. I'm underlining my 4. I'm chopping off right after that, and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go next with this number, okay? So think about this, right? This is in the 40s. We're pretending, right? I've got my number line, okay? I'm at the 40, and I've done 9 extra hops, right? Your extra hops are always over here. If I've done 9 extra hops, does that mean I'm closer to the 50, or am I closer at staying at 40? 40 or 50, which one? I'm only 1 hop away from being at 50, right? So that's letting me know those 9 extra little hops tell me I'm going to be rounding up, okay? This 49 is going to turn into a 50 rather than staying at a 40 and rounding down, okay? So again, each time you are looking at where you've chopped it off, that's kind of telling you what fake little number line you need to think of in your head, okay? So if this is at a 0, then you're thinking between 0 and 10, right? If this is at a 3, you're thinking of 30 or rounding up to 40. If this is a 4, right, you're thinking of 40 or 50, yeah? So let's keep going with the next ones. If I look over here, right, it's the same thing. If this is at a 0, right, then I'm trying to determine if I'm closest to 0 or rounding up to 10, okay? So if I'm a 0 and I've done 7 extra little hops, boop, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Am I closer to the 10 on that number line, or am I closer to staying at the 0? I'm definitely closer to 10. So as I'm chopping this off and turning it all into zeros, right, this needs to become a 1, because what I'm saying is this together is going to become a 10. That's how I'm rounding up to 10, okay? And again, you can think of it as 1 or 1, 0 for the 10. They mean the same thing, correct? They have the same value. So now moving on. 1 and 9/10 right here, okay? Again, when you draw that line, this is telling you kind of your place value, where you're going and where you could end up, okay? So if I'm at 90 and then I do 6 extra hops, am I closer to staying at that 90, or am I closer to hopping all the way over to 100? Because that would be my next round up, right? So if I'm at 96, I'm closer to 100, correct? So if I rewrite this as 100, that's crazy. That's kind of tricky, because that means this is going to be a 0. This is going to be a 0. And that 1, that means I'm rounding up to 100, is going to go over into this place value area. Well, I already have a 1 there, correct? So that means that altogether, this is going to round up to 2. Okay, that's like getting your 200 basically. If that one confuses you, think of it in terms of money, right? If you have $1.96, are you closer to having $2, or are you closer to having $1.90? Okay, so the overall tenths spot is kind of a great way to think of money as well. I try not to rely too much on the money scenario until we actually do practice with money in class, because money with dollars and change is not something that a lot of kids can relate to nowadays. So I kind of hold off on that example. But okay, so moving on, that was our tenths, right? We're going to keep going. Here's your hundredths. It's the exact same scenario, right? Except for now, instead of underlining the 7, we're going to be underlining the 0, because that's my hundredth spot. Find the number you're going to underline, chop it off from there, okay? So hundredths is where I'm going to stop. I'm going to keep that, and then everything else gets chopped off. once you draw that division line, right, once you separate it out, that's kind of giving you your overall scenario here, okay? Couple ways that you can look at this, okay? I just kind of ignore all of this here and I say, okay, if this is a 0, I'm trying to figure out, am I closer to just staying at 0 or am I closer to going up to the next amount, which would be 10? So if this is a number line, if I'm a 0 and I do 2 extra little hops, am I closer to staying at 0 or am I closer to moving on to 10? And I'm definitely, with only 2 extra little hops, I'm definitely closer to staying at the 0. So that lets me know I'm just going to 0 this out and I am done, okay? If you want to, you can think of it in terms of the entirety. Like you can say 702. Is that closer to 700 or is it closer to 710? However you want to look at that, you're just wrapping your brain around it in terms of numbers and being closest to the things around it, okay? Is this actually worth a whole number of 700 or 710? No, this isn't the decimal place value side, right? But I'm just using this in terms of being able to determine if it's going to round up or down using number sense, okay, instead of a rhyme. So let's move on to the next one, okay? Here we go. Here's my 100th spot. I'm keeping that and I'm chopping off everything else behind it no matter what, correct? So again, you can look at this a few different ways, okay? You can just categorize this in general as, okay, if this is 50 and then I do extra hops, right? I do 8 extra hops. Am I closer to getting to 60 now? Or am I closer to staying at 50 itself? Okay, so I just kind of look at the number and the digits around it. So if this is 50, then this would be like 8 extra hops. Am I closer to 60 or no? If you want, though, you can look at the entire thing here and say 758. Is that closer to 760? Or is it closer to staying at 750? Either way, you're using more number sense and number line logic than you are with rounding with little jingles, correct? So if I'm looking at this, I know for sure 58 is closer to 60. Okay, so I know that's how I'm going to change those numbers. That's going to turn into 60. And everything else, I could put 0, 0, 0. Everything else behind it's going to become a 0 no matter what. Okay, looking at my next number, right? Here's my 100ths spot. Chopping it off here. No matter what, everything behind it is going to become a 0. Okay, I can add them to my answer if I want, or I can just chop them off and leave them. Either way, they're going to be the same value. I just leave them off usually. But okay, so anyway, chopping off here, my 9. So I look at this as an overall place value or an overall digit of like 90s. I'm in the 90s, right? Is 95 closer to getting to 100, or is it closer to staying at 90 itself? Okay. If that's a little tricky for you, again, you can just look at this as 795. If I'm at 795, you could write that out on a number line. Am I closer to staying at 790? Or am I closer to being at 800? And from there, you're using your number line, you're using your counting and your logic to determine how you want to round. Instead of like 5 or more, let it soar, all that stuff, you can use that instead. So I know that that's actually closer to 800. So I can go through and I can change that to my 800. If I wanted to add zeros here, I could, okay? If you just wanted to look at it in terms of 95 and say that's closer to 100, then you can actually write this as 100, right? Because that would still make these things turn into zeros. These place values are zeros. And that 1 would just kind of add into this place value column, and that's where you'd get your 8. So either way you want to look at it, okay? Now looking over here, we have 4 in our 100th spot, and we're chopping it off from here. Everything else becomes a 0, correct? So if I'm just looking at these place values, I'm looking at 42. Is 42 closer to staying at 40, or is it closer to going up to 50, okay? So again, you can use your jingle if you want. But in general, I know that 42 is definitely closer to 40 than it is to 50. So that's how I determine if I'm going to keep it a 4 or if I'm going to change it to a 5. I'm not going to round up to a 5 because it's definitely not closer to 50. So that's how I know what to do with those numbers. I know to keep it at 4. And then if I put everything else behind it as a 0, then I've left it at 40. Okay. Moving on to the last section, thousandths, right? That's 3 place values over. So if I'm looking over here at the first number provided to me, I have a 0 in the tenths spot. Then I have an 8 in the hundredths, and then an 8 in the thousandths. So if I'm going through and I'm underlining things, right, and then I'm chopping off right afterwards, this is where I'm at. Don't let the overall number of digits throw you off. All you care about is what's right around that line, okay? Right now, nothing else matters, okay? So I'm still only looking at what's in front and what's directly behind. And this lets me know I'm in the 80s, right? So am I closer to 80 or am I closer to rounding up to 90? So if I'm at my little number line here and I start at 80 and I do one little extra hop, and is that making me closer to 90 or is it making me closer to staying on the 80? It's making me stay closer to 80. So that's how I know I just want to chop this off and keep these zeros, okay? And that'll keep me at 80 here, okay? That's how you can use logic. All right. If you want, you can say, oh, it's 4 or less, let it rest. Okay. So you're just going to let this rest if you want. But technically, that's what you're doing when you're looking at it with number logic. Okay. So let's look at the next one now. We have 4 in the thousandths spot, right? And I'm chopping it off from there. So again, doesn't matter how big your number is. All I care about are the digits right in front and right after. So I know I'm working in the 40s, right? So is this 49? I'm working on a number line between 40 and 50, okay? So I'm at 40 and then I do 9 extra hops. Is that getting me closer to 50 or is it keeping me closer to 40? Well, if I've done 9 extra hops, I'm only 1 hop away from 50. So that's how I know to round. If I change this to 50 now, that will make everything work. Plus I know like this line means everything behind it becomes a 0 anyway, okay? So by making this a 50 and then everything behind it a 0, I know that I am chopping it off and rounding it correctly, okay? Next one. Here we go. So by looking at this, I have a 9, right? Again, it's a huge number, but all I care about is locating the thousandth spot. Right here is the 9. And then what's next door to it, right, where I'm chopping it off. No matter what, these are going to be zeros, no matter what, okay? I just have to determine what this is going to become, the digit in front and behind where I'm chopping it off, right? So if I'm at 98, okay, that means I'm working in the 90s, all right? So if I'm at 90 and I do 8 extra hops, am I closer to going all the way up to 100 now, or am I closer to staying at the 90 mark? 98, is that closer to staying at 90? Or is it closer to moving up to 100? And it's definitely closer to the number 100, right? So think about this. If I turn 98 into 100, that means I'm going to have a 1 sitting over in this place value. And then this is a 0 and a 0. And this had to be a 0 anyway, right? So all of these are going to become zeros. And that 1... right? 98 became 100. That 1 is sitting over the 8. So now this place value is affected and it becomes a 9. Okay? If you want, you can even look at it in bigger terms of 898 altogether, right? That is definitely closer to 900 than it is to staying at, or rounding down to 800. Okay? So anyway, that is how you can use your number logic to help you determine how you are going to round your actual place values. Ta-da! So that's it. I hope that helps. And I hope that you can kind of use that plus maybe your jingle hand in hand to help you through this rounding process.